Colleagues, it's such a pleasure to get to be here with you this morning, even though it is a little bit early. I heard you had a wonderful time last night, and I love stroopwafels, so it's what I promised to bring my nephews home. As Amit said, I am jointly appointed between two very strangely named schools at Arizona State University. About 20 years ago, our university president decided to break down disciplinary barriers, and he gave all of our schools really strange names. So it might help if you think of me as working in a science policy school that also happened to make a baby with a science and technology studies school. I'm going to tell you a bit about myself because I do think that knowing a bit about someone helps you understand why they're obsessed with the things they are obsessed with. I have an undergraduate in chemistry and molecular biology and a master's degree in food chemistry, and and a culinary certificate. And through those things, I got really interested in why foods taste the way they do. I love to hike. This is a picture of me and my brother and his annoying dog up in the mountains in eastern Utah. I love to bake, specifically pies and bread, and I'm really interested in our water systems. And this is a picture I saw in France this summer, where Nestle Water, it was discovered that the claims they were making on their water about the different mineral compositions, which is important because bottled water has a history as being medicinal rather than something people drink. What was in the bottles didn't match what was on the label. And then finally, I'm really interested in smell, and I love this quote I saw in the JFK airport in New York City. The first condition of understanding a foreign country is to smell it. And to me, Delft smells like potatoes, which means I feel like I'm at home because my parents are from Idaho, which is the land of potato growing in the United States. So today we have three main points I'm going to take you through on our journey. You're going to be doing some tasting while we talk about a story about an out-of-place smell. We're going to discuss the 20th century U.S. dream, at least, of piped water, and perhaps it's coming to an end. And finally, we're going to discuss what thinking about aesthetic issues might mean for your place of work or your future place of work. So to get us started, and I know it's early in the morning, and at least if I was in the U.S., half of you would not eat this because it's black licorice, but we're going to pass around some black licorice. So take a piece. If you eat black licorice, if you don't, that's fine. And wait for a minute, because we're going to taste it together. So once everyone has a piece, and again, if you don't want to put this in your mouth, that's fine. I obviously study food, and I understand that when someone invites you to eat something, they're also inviting you into a moment of vulnerability, right? They're saying, incorporate this into your body. And so if this isn't the thing you want to eat, cool, but do break it open to smell it, at least. Okay, so there are generally what we could call 6 steps to tasting in a way that allows you to pay attention. The first step is going to be plugging your nose, because that's going to stop the aromatic molecules from moving through your orthonasal cavity, which is where most of our sensory experiences of eating or drinking happen. You're going to take a bite. This is weird, right? You're going to be doing this. Chew for a bit, kind of roll that licorice around in your mouth, take a quick breath in through your mouth, and then release your nose. And you're going to get a massive burst of that licorice flavor. And that's going to go along with the story I'm telling. So on January 9th, 2014, so a little over a decade ago, folks in West Virginia, so specifically around their capital, learned that a large amount of a chemical called crude MCHM, so 4-methylcyclohexane methanol, had spilled into their water supply. That evening, the governor issued a massive do not use order. So basically the entire metropolitan region was told, don't drink your water, don't shower with your water, don't even flush your toilets with your water. And they declared a state of emergency. You had all of these signs of really disrupted lives for the US, where there were lines of people waiting to get water from the US Army. There were plastic bags that had been placed over the drinking fountains and the sink taps, lots of news reports, and one very smelly reality. That chemical that had been spilled into the water, it smells like black licorice. Now, I don't know about you, but even though I like black licorice, the idea of turning on my tap or getting a drink and having it smell like black licorice, especially if I knew that smell was caused by a chemical that folks didn't know anything about, would make me very nervous. And one of the things that folks said, this is the president of the water company that is in charge of municipal water for the region. After a few days, they were able, so again, uncharacterized chemical. It was used to make something called clean coal, which is a bit of an oxymoron, but it essentially helps remove impurities from the washing water that is used in the production of coal. And the company that was using it refused to disclose exactly what was in the mixture that had been spilled, so they knew that this 4-MCHM was one of the main components, but they didn't really know everything that was in it because of intellectual rights laws in the United States. The company that produced that mixture didn't have to tell folks everything that was in it. So complain about legal system. Jeff said, we can detect this material, but we don't know how to quantify it. We're working with toxicologists, physicians, and industrial hygienists to try and understand the risk. What kinds of quantities can be present in drinking water and not cause harm? We don't know that the water is not safe, but we can't say that it is. So you can imagine this created this like massive feeling of insecurity because you could potentially smell this in the water. And that smell ends up sticking around long after they release guidance on how to like flush your plumbing systems and said, it's okay to start using this water again. And they passed out this thing to the community that essentially how to get the contaminated water out. And then they said, any lingering smell, which is expected, is not a health issue. Do you believe them? Let's see. Well, at least the people I talked to did not believe that. So this is one of the groups of folks I talked to. They told me they were at the time parent of a 6-year-old, so she's now 17. The government is saying it's safe at this level, and others are saying it's safe at this other level, and others are saying this is what's happening in my house, such as, hey, you said my water should be clean, and I'm turning the water on, the taps on, and I'm getting this massive hit of this smell, and I feel sick, I feel dizzy, my skin's reacting in weird ways. You know, do you risk drinking it? I've got a 6-year-old in my house. At a certain level, they're saying it's safe to drink, but at the same time, you could smell it. I mean, come on, you could smell it and taste it. Nobody was believable. So my take-home message from this short story to get us started is that aesthetic issues in your water are issues of buy-in and issues of trust. In this case, folks didn't trust their government, and they didn't trust the water systems. And they quickly learned that they couldn't necessarily trust the pipes in their homes too, because those plastic pipes were absorbing this molecule and then desorbing it over time. Okay, so we're done with story 1, part 2. Now let's talk about this dream of piped water that emerges in the 20th century and is still shaping our lives. So we have this 1900s editorial cartoon. It's from 1909, and this character who's supposed to be like William Penn, one of the major founders of the city of Philadelphia, is anticipating the arrival of filtration to the city in a few days. So he's raising a glass of filtered water to say goodbye to this departing devil whose suitcase reeks with the germs of typhoid, diphtheria, and scarlet fever. By this point, researchers understand that most of what causes waterborne disease is something that's present in water. They're microbes, and this is something that can be killed. But they're not really in agreement about how to do it. Should they do filtration? Should they protect the watershed? Should they use chemical treatments? Or all three? And eventually this gets resolved in a way that looks a lot like our 20th century water systems. Thanks. Those of you in the back, if I get quiet, raise your hands, wave at me, do a dance. That would make me happy. So we have this early 20th century effort to address those water issues in some places like Philadelphia. It was filtration. In 1908, you get the first mass chlorination event in water in Jersey City, New Jersey. But that idea of adding a chemical had actually really come to shape over the 18th century, so up through early 1900s, the idea that this isn't how we want to treat our water. And yet what ends up happening is they pretty much discover you add chlorine, the water's safe, you protect the watershed, the water's even safer, and you filter it, the water's even safer. So you get this imagination / this reality in the United States and many other areas like Europe, where they build pipes and add chlorine and create these municipal water systems with the aim of making water that is safe for everyone. Which raises this question: what is clean water for you or for your neighbors? And so I have here a picture of South Chicago. You can see all this industry around that water system. And for them, clean water initially was water that allowed you to do whatever you needed to do, and water that also acted as a place for you to dump stuff into. In 1933, Dr. William A. Evans talked about this idea that I think of as transforming water from that natural water that's out there in the system to something that people can drink. Few communities have access to first-class sources of water. There are too many factories and too many people for that. Cities are forced to take muddy water, sewage-polluted water, or water into which factories have poured all kinds of waste and purify it as well as can be done. So even though that early 1900s dream was clean water for everyone, by 1933 in the US, that's still not the case. And I have another story to tell. I like stories. So I want you to jump across the ocean with me. We're going to Chicago. It's 1929. It's the winter. Folks are turning their taps on, and they're getting not dissimilar to what happened in West Virginia, an obnoxious smell coming into their homes. And sometimes chicken feathers. So the folks who were in charge of the water supply decided to go out, even though it was cold, and do a little boat ride in Lake Michigan to try and figure out where this was coming from. And they realized it's from phenol being dumped into Lake Michigan. So I have a little picture of phenol there for us. And that was leading to smells that were described as Band-Aid, plasticky, medicinal, disinfectant. Which raises a question. If you're the person in charge of the water supply, and you know that those sorts of smells are coming into your system, what do you want to do? And I'll just call on you in the front row. What do you want to do?
Maybe do some tests.
Do some tests? Figure out what it is? Awesome. And those of you who have done some tests, what would you do next? What would you like to do? Okay, my colleague in the stripes on the first, second, third, fourth row. Oh.
So after doing the testing, do the treatment.
Treatment. And what are you hoping the treatment will do?
Make the water clean.
Make the water good. Make the water taste better, which is fantastic. Except how do you make the water taste better? Can you erase that taste of place? And they started doing these. Chicago hired this guy, John Bayless, to come in. By the way, I just love that you guys have a red cube to throw around the classroom. That's so fantastic. So they stole him from the city of Baltimore, had him come in and start doing all of this work. And there's this lovely claim from the Chicago Tribune that he was capable of making the city's water, which really was the bath water for the entire industrial ecosystem around Chicago, taste like spring water. It was a very hopeful headline, to say the least, because there are lots of reports after this about how he didn't succeed in that. But the core question that John Bayless was asking himself was essentially one that I'm going to rephrase as, can the taste of place be erased? In this case, can you do treatments? Can you figure out what's present to make that go away? And this leads to this massive research effort really starts in the 1930s, really finishes in the 1980s, for measuring this taste that's found in place. And they start pulling on this idea that there are thresholds of perception. So some molecules we can perceive at super, super small amounts. In other molecules, it takes a lot of it before you notice it. And this idea of thresholds of perception was first introduced in 1899, and the municipal water folks in Lincoln, Illinois, find that, and they're like, we're going to run with this idea in the 1930s, and it ends up entering the standard methods in the United States for thinking about how to test the presence of taste and smells. It becomes a really consistent way where water workers tried to talk with each other about how effective their methods were. So they start testing stuff like activated carbon. Can that remove taste and smells? Different forms of filtration media. And, someone who's working with a water that's got lots of copper in it is trying to talk in one area, is trying to talk to someone else who's working with a water that has a lot of sulfur in it, and figure out how good is your method at reducing the taste and smells, hopefully to below the level that most people can perceive it at. And what ends up happening is by the early 1900s through the late 1900s, early 2000s, but really late 1900s, 1980 to 1990, you get this effort to really identify the major taste and smell experiences folks might have with their municipal water and identify that with specific molecules. Because once you know the molecule, like you said, once you can test for something and you know the molecule is present, you can use your awesome chemical or chemistry powers, put on your chemistry cape or call your colleague who has a chemistry cape and treat accordingly. Except it costs a lot of money in some cases. So we'll get there. So I had this idea that we could potentially use this concept of terroir. So this is a French concept that is most often used with wine. I'm not a wine drinker. I don't know if you guys are, but they make this claim in France that you can taste the place where the wine was grown. And you can also taste the work that winemakers do to make water, or to not make water, to make their wine taste the way they do. And I think you can also apply this to thinking about the aesthetic qualities of water. So we've got two things. We have the taste of place that's shaped by that industrial activity of dumping water or dumping chemicals into a water source, or potentially more recently dumping phosphates into a water source, which leads to algae growth, which leads to algae producing lots of tasty things in your water. But it's also the work of erasing the taste of a place that's done by engineers, chemists, and other folks whose job it is to manage those things we can perceive in the industrial food supply. Okay, so we've done two stories here. We have that first story of the presence of that black licorice flavor in West Virginia, and then we have a story of industrial contamination, I guess in both cases industrial contamination, in the Chicago area. That kind of is to set the stage for everything we're going to talk about next. So current regulations in the United States say that tastes and smells are secondary things. They are nice to fix, but we don't have to fix them. In contrast, you have to make certain that your water meets certain standards with regards to coliforms, essentially none, with regards to arsenic, lead, and other dangerous molecules out there. So, what has this led to in the US, and how has that shaped the way we interact with stuff? What ends up happening is you have a divided landscape, if you will, in the US, where some places have really good water and some places have really bad water. I grew up in an area with what I like to think of as really good water, right next to a mountain. We have a spring. The water's delicious. It's got the right amount of minerals in it. I love it. My in-laws live in Florida. If any of you have a chance to go to Florida, the water smells like rotten eggs no matter how much treatment they do, because there's only so much they're willing to do. It's perfectly safe, but it does not smell good, and it especially doesn't smell good if you make tea with it. So we get this, what you could call divided landscape of access to good tasting water. Most of these cities have access to safe water, but not good water. And so we end up with these water taste test winners. If you go look at the American Water Works Association's website for who wins taste tests for water, Florida is never on there. Arizona's never on there. California has a couple cities in the Northern California who can get there, but other places no. And so a lot of this depends on your source water. Is it a groundwater versus a surface water? Levels of salinity, mineral composition, but also the activity of the microflora that happen to live in your water. So here's the core obstacle that I see us as having as folks who work in and think about water, which is that consumers assess their water quality primarily by its sensory qualities. You can tell someone on a label as much as you want that your water is safe. You can send out public relations announcements, but the reality is if it doesn't smell good or look good, they don't believe you. And we all understand that, right? This goes back to that thing where I said if you got a bottle of water and it smelled like licorice and it didn't have some specific label on it that said licorice flavored, you'd be like, no, thank you, I'm good. So this is where we're going to think from next. And here's my next take-home message. Aesthetic issues can become issues of access, equity, and even health, because a lot of people then opt out of buying the water. So, or not buying, drinking the water. In the US, what we have, or at least in the Phoenix area where I live, we have really high levels of salinity in our water. So total dissolved solids, pretty high up there. I think they're close to 400, which is kind of the point at which folks stop accepting it. And a lot of, I'm gonna call them my neighbors because they are my neighbors, don't use their tap water for drinking water, even though it's definitely cheaper and it's quite possibly safer. Instead, they go to a local store where they can buy water, or we have these things that are called water mills. They look like the windmills that are all around here, but they just have a spigot that you can refill a massive water bottle from. They use the municipal water supply and put another filter on it, but it's essentially municipal water. But folks in my neighborhood think that water is safer because there's been an additional level of treatment. So that's the socioeconomic group of us who are on the lower bit of that triangle. Folks in the Phoenix area who have a lot of money tend to buy reverse osmosis systems that they install in their house. That thus means they're using 4 times as much water as the rest of us to get that water that tastes like it came out of a fancy bottle. So first provocation. Why should you all think about aesthetics in the US water system when you're probably dealing with a completely different set of circumstances? We'll come back to this question, but take a minute. What's your gut check? Worthwhile? We'll see. I think yes. So, part 3. What does thinking about aesthetic qualities mean for your own work? So, just as a reminder, even though these are all headlines that are relatively recent from the 2020s, you can tell that taste and odor is still a massive issue in the United States, which also means it's a great opportunity space. What if communities start caring about public perception? Could you help retrain trust in a city's tap water system? And one of the approaches that folks have started doing is what they're calling I think of them as water tastings. So you're inviting the community into doing tastings with you as a municipal water supplier to try and understand not only what they like and dislike, but what they will accept. So the city of Aurora in Colorado is a super great example of this. They knew that they were going to be bringing on a new water supply that had a lot of total dissolved solids in it. And rather than just introducing that and educating people to say, hey, look, it's safe, but it's salty. They actually did tastings with their communities to find the threshold at which the community said this is acceptable. And then they blended to below that threshold. And then they started stepping it up just a little bit at a time. Because they knew that one, you get a water that's acceptable and you change it just a little bit and people wouldn't really notice. And you change it a little bit more and people wouldn't really notice. So they had this range in which they knew they could work with their source water, but also with their consumers' tastes. And I love that they thought about this from the perspective of a consumer first, or like a mouth and nose first, as opposed to just saying, we're going to tell you as drinkers what it is that you should like or should find acceptable. So you can calibrate to a community's tolerances to taste to produce palatable drinking water. And forgive me, I love alliteration. So anytime you see something like produce palatable, potable water, that's just what I love. Okay. So in the US, the big what if question I'm asking is, what if we flipped things around and taste and odor were the primary sort of things that we build towards, with the health stuff also being primary, instead of sticking it over in the secondary? What if we center taste and odor as we build our systems? And this looks like something specifically in higher regulation environments. So Singapore and Japan have way more water regulation than we do in the US. They have a claim in their regulatory system that water should be free of taste and odors that would be objectionable to the majority of consumers. In Japan, it says water that does not have any abnormal taste or odor, provided, however, that taste or odor arising from disinfection is excluded. That's tricky. A lot of folks in the US and elsewhere really don't like chlorine and disinfection things off of that. So this is a really exciting idea. Ooh, we could change the regulatory system. If you've been paying any attention, however, to US politics, which I wish I could say you weren't, but you probably are, we are not in what I would call a higher regulation environment right now. I don't know what we're in. We're in a very strange time. But we have this other problem going on. So the US is currently in a non-regulatory environment, let businesses do what they want. And then we built our systems 100 plus years ago. They're aging out. We're starting to have issues with pipes collapsing. They can't necessarily provide enough water to the folks that they need to keep those systems running. Our water supplies are drying up in the Western US. It's kind of a scary time. And as all of my water community folks say, never waste a good crisis, because it's a great opportunity to get communication out. So here's where I should have a picture of the Lake Powell bathtub ring, which is essentially a massive reservoir that has dropped so much that you can see hundreds of feet of bleached rock from where the water used to be, but no longer is. But just imagine, because we're in a situation where our public folks are saying to us, well, we're going to have to try something new. We're going to start recycling our wastewater and drinking it. Which leads us to this interesting claim again. We're back to consumers assessing tap water primarily by its sensory qualities, which also include sensory qualities that you can't necessarily taste or smell. The idea of saying to folks, we're using your wastewater as your drinking water, activates a completely different sensory quality, that feeling of disgust and that concern. So how do we use consumer insights to build good enough systems? And here I want to think with not Phoenix, not Delft, but maybe the communities that are outside of those large municipal areas who are differently served. So I told you I grew up in a community with good water. It's also only a community of 5,000 people, and the guy who plows our streets in winter for snow is the guy who dumps chlorine into our water. So doing a lot of things. It's a very small community water system. So at any time, we don't necessarily have the expertise we need to do something to keep that system safe. We have other systems in the US. My grandparents grew up on a well system that is over an aquifer that has been claimed to have been contaminated with nuclear molecules from one of Idaho's national research labs. We have joked for years that you drink the water and glow in the dark, but there's no testing system. And then we have folks who are just living off of their own community-built systems or something else. We're calling these modular, adaptable systems that may or may not be safe. So how do you move beyond that dream of having a massive city where everyone's getting tap water piped into their home, which is a great dream, but also a very expensive dream to maintain, and start thinking with a good enough system? And we could think of this as building a fit-for-purpose system. Maybe you live somewhere like Florida where people just don't drink your water, or Phoenix where people just don't drink your water, and because of aesthetic qualities. Maybe you live somewhere where the current social practices in water provisioning are all about the relationship with the person who brings you your water, and saying to someone, actually, you should just get your water from a tap or a pipe, also says you're cutting out a social interaction with someone that's really critical to the community. Maybe that person not only brings you water, but they bring you important gossip about what's going on in your neighbor's house. And finally, how can we think with knowledge networks? And here's where I like to think about the fact that tasting never happens in isolation. How many, I mean, sure it does. I ate breakfast alone today. But when I tend to go out with friends, we eat together and we have conversations where someone says, "Ooh, this is really good. You should try it." You've had that, right? How many of you had a stroopwafel before yesterday? Okay. Those of you who hadn't, did someone say to you, "You should try this"? Or how did you decide to try it? Okay. Will you tell us? Yeah, I'd love to have the microphone go up there.
I told Narelli yesterday that I had tried stroopwafel in Jamaica, but it was packaged, and I read the packaging and I said, "Oh, yes, the Dutch," and I had watched some YouTube videos, but I always wanted to try the warm one.
Yeah.
That I saw on YouTube videos, so I said, "Narelli, I'm going to try some stroopwafel. I have to get the real thing." And we were in the line for about an hour, and I said, "If this tastes like what I had in Jamaica, my time would have been wasted." Narelli said, "Girl, I don't think it's worth it."
Uh-huh.
And then we tried it. Turned out it was
It was actually worth the hour.
yes, it was worth it.
Okay, and why did you trust your colleague when she said we should stand in line for an hour for this thing?
Really, we were having a conversation all along, and we were speaking with Sarah, and I didn't even feel it at that point. And I'm like, I mean, hey, I'm gonna be in the Netherlands for one time in my life, maybe. I don't know. I might come back, I might not. So it's gonna be worth it. And she's from Jamaica, I'm from Belize, so we're pretty close, and that's how like I trust you.
They're neighbors, right? It's kind of a very large neighborly geography, but you're neighbors. Thank you so much for sharing that story. That is how people taste their water together too. And my colleagues and I have a really weird position. So I'm technically a professor of art and science. I have no idea why they hired me, but I'm not going to complain. I got a job. So my colleagues and I did a big water tasting at an art festival in 2021. We did one in 21 and 22. And we had set up this water bar where we had local surface water, local groundwater, and then reverse osmosis water from a local brewery that was supposed to be as close as possible to mimicking the taste of direct potable reuse water, which Scottsdale, Arizona is trying to promote right now. People came in and tasted, and then we had them leave behind physical traces of their perceptions. So we had different tables with sensory cues on them, like salt or green plants or chlorine or pipes, and then a final table where they could add their own thing because they thought we'd missed something. Somebody told me they were tasting thyme, like Time, which I was like, yeah, that's cool. You are tasting thyme. Who knows how long this water's been here. But what we observed was, one, people had strong reactions, pretty salty water, especially when you compare it to the reverse osmosis water. The French folks who came through were like, "Oh, this is good mineral water." And someone else swore at us for sharing such horrible water with them, even though it was the perfectly safe water. But they tasted together. Parents would ask their children questions or talk to their children about what they were tasting. Children would turn to their friends and say, "Hey, this is the experience I was having." A group of college students, like a gaggle of geese, came in and, as they flitted around together, you could hear them joking with each other about the experiences they were having, talking about it. So remembering that we taste in a network is really important because, one, if someone says it's good, you're more likely to trust it. But quite often someone says it's bad, and then you don't trust it. So if you want to do this pragmatically, you're going to ask yourself, what are your users already doing? What knowledge communities do they use to understand their water? What tastes and smells, that too should be a do they think of as being normal or acceptable? What level of total dissolved solids will they actually say, yeah, I'll drink that? So thinking back to those French gentlemen who came through our exhibit and were like, this is a great mineral water, versus the folks who I assume were local who said, why would I ever drink this water? How much iron are they willing to accept? And here you're not just talking about drinking, you're also talking about what happens to their clothes when they wash with that iron. How much sulfur are they willing to accept? I met someone who grew up in Florida and he said, that smell I find so hard to navigate, he just thinks of as the smell of home. How much geosmin or MIB are they comfortable with? We get a lot of, when I say geosmin, does anyone immediately know what smell or taste? Okay, no. Think of it as earthy, green, and cork all together in your water. And from September to early November, we always have high levels of geosmin in our water, but from September to early November, the water in Phoenix really tastes of it. And I say to myself every year, this is great. This smell and taste experience I'm having tells me the weather's going to finally start cooling down. Because it shows up in part because the reservoir that we're drawing from, the water starts to rotate. So all of the microbial and algal action that was happening down below gets up to the top, and then that comes downstream, and then yay, we get to taste it, but also, ooh, it's really hard. It's the one time during the year when I consistently filter my water. And finally, what colors might be present? Now, I understand you guys normally break at 45 minutes, and we're at 45 minutes, which is great, because the next thing we're going to do is think about what's good enough for your site. So, cool, let's take a break. Now, in our ideal world, this classroom would have lots of movable chairs, right? Instead, this classroom doesn't, which means you're just going to have to figure out how to do this yourselves. I would like you to get in groups of 3 to 4, introduce yourself to each other, and we're going to take the next 5 minutes where you're going to, maybe you've already done this, but probably not with necessarily the group you're going to be with. I want you to tell each other about your water system. I'd like, and by your water system, I'm going to say either the place you consider home at the moment, other than Delft, because I understand most of you have been here less than a week, or the water system you anticipate going to work for or in. So talk about things like tastes and smells that you would think of as normal for that system. Talk about where it works within that framing of the dream of piped water, where everyone is getting piped water into their homes versus maybe they're using well water, maybe the water is coming from multiple sources. Make certain you're taking notes on this, because the next part we're going to do is going to involve imagining out what a good enough system is going to be that can produce safe, clean, acceptable drinking water for folks in this system that you're working towards. So I'm going to set a timer, 5 minutes, go. If it's longer than, like if we need longer than 5, you'll tell me. And if you're sitting alone, because I see some of you amazing Lone Island folks, I do regret that we're going to ask you to get up and move to work together. So I have observed a couple things. I love that I'm seeing you sharing pictures with each other. That's awesome. I see it up here too, of your systems. That's really cool because it's part of how we come to understand stuff. We overheard some things about how you access from wells to pipes. We're going to do a little bit of share out now. So Amit is going to bring around the microphone to a couple of groups where one of you or multiple of you will highlight what you heard that maybe surprised you or was different from your own system. So let's get started with that. Anyone want to start us off? Okay, cool. Impressive.
My name is Joseph. And we were gathered here like many countries, Peru, French Iceland, I was really surprised about Iceland that he has free hot water and free cold water. Both of them are like easy to drink. It doesn't have like pretty much problems with them. About the hot water, has been sulfur, so taste the sulfur. I was really impressed by that.
Is it coming from hot springs?
Yeah, the hot water comes from hot springs, just everywhere. And the cold water is glacial water that gets filtered through like the volcanic rocks. So we just get two different But I thought his was actually more interesting because his water comes from the plants that capture moisture in the air and then it just runs off to the city. So that's also just as exotic in my head as maybe mine was.
Cool. Okay, other group. Who wants a red hot potato?
It's me and my group from Addis Ababa and Malawi. But I wasn't listening in Malawi situation because 80% is surface water, not like my country and this Baba country, which depend on groundwater. Most of the time we depend on the groundwater. And quality of the water, I think in all of our country is not that very good, especially Malawi because it's surface water. And this is new information for me.
So is the water quality degraded in part because of human activity, mining? Tell us more about what has caused the water quality to be less good.
Well, actually, I think in other parts you'll find that the water is okay, but then we have other parts that are extremely hot, and we find that the water is bitter, and that one is from the groundwater, and even I think the river water is a bit bitterish. And so, if you go to the central region, the capital city, you find that the water is usually dirty. Talking to the people that work in the water port, it's like a norm to them to say, well, that's what we have now. But I think we can articulate back to the old structures as well. And I think we just need new systems there, but then money. So, yes, that's the happy situation.
So I like, and just pass your microphone up, I like that you highlighted, so over here we had the highlight of very different methods of even getting the water from the environment, and the fact that water can come at different temperatures, which is also an aesthetic issue, as our colleague from South Africa over here pointed out about the water from Delft, that it comes out of the taps, sometimes room temperature essentially, not super cold. Or where I live in the summer, it comes out of the tap sometimes close to 30 degrees Celsius because it's Phoenix. It's hot. I mean, they're hotter places, but it's hot. And then you guys just highlighted for us this idea that there are both issues like bitterness that might be naturally caused and then issues like dirtiness that are present from the environment. Okay, please.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Eric from Kenya, and this morning I'm actually privileged that I'm sitting with a colleague from a neighboring country, Uganda. And because we are neighbors, currently our systems are more or less the same. We rely on both surface and groundwater. And the treatment processes are the same. So she told me that the water is good in terms of taste, in terms of color, and also in terms of smell. That is the surface water that has been treated from the municipal. But I think, of course, more or less the same concern that I've had over time, because I was interested in that question. Our treatment systems majorly focuses on eliminating microbials, so like you should have zero microbials in the water. But the major concerns are things like the microplastics and other chemicals. I don't know whether there are other countries that do that better than we do. Maybe that could be a question that somebody could answer. Thank you.
And you just highlighted another issue that we're not necessarily addressing here, which is the question of these they call them in the States emerging contaminants of concern. I think the emerging part has to do with more with the science rather than the fact that the contaminants are already there. Those are interesting in part because we recognize their presence, but we can't taste them. So just like microbes often, E. coli is tasteless, the water can look perfectly wonderful and taste perfectly good and still make you sick, or Giardia. So that interesting tension. Thank you so much for sharing your experience. I'd love to hear, did any of you end up talking about knowledge communities yet? If so, please share.
Everyone, I'm from Tanzania.
Just like I didn't, wasn't close enough to the microphone.
Okay, I'm Hassan from Tanzania. I have friends around from Kenya and from Uganda. Okay, so the case I'm sharing is in Tanzania there's a mountain and it's full of springs likely, but it erupted some years past. So literally most springs are kind of being contaminated. So you might find three types of water. So within a kilometer walk, you might find water that has color like literally tea, but it doesn't smell. It just flows freely, and you might there's water that is literally mineral based. You can test. It's literally like a medicine or something, but I used to drink it as well. And there's other water that people do use now, but it has a certain salt of its own. You drink it, but I don't know. It's in the way that it is, and so the problem that is there is that people are using that, and so once the municipal brought treated water, it kind of came with that test that is somewhat strange, the chlorine and stuff. So people would use that just because it has been brought by the tap or so, but there's the issue of acceptability. They kind of not trust it like it's safe or something. So that is it.
So I love that you highlighted, and yeah, please pass the microphone over to your colleague over here. I love that you highlighted this idea of.
She has woken up.
You have a new friend, by the way. You guys will have a conversation afterwards, and 2 years from now, she'll say to you, "Remember that time when you threw the red thing at me and bounced off my head?" And I'm like, yes. But it's going to be a good friendship. I love that you highlighted the tea-colored water for starting with. Actually, the Massachusetts area in the United States historically has had tea-colored water, and that's what people were drinking, and then they moved to this purification system that removed the colors, and so people don't remember that history. And also this question of what happens when you start chlorinating the water. Do people trust it? And my experience in the US is we over-chlorinate our water potentially, and then folks come to Europe where they use different systems and don't trust the water here, and so are proudly carrying around filtration water bottles to demonstrate how unsafe European water is, even though it's probably safer here. So the interesting knowledge community that emerges potentially even around the smell of chlorine. Please.
Good morning, everyone. A bit of a diverse group here as well. Colombia as well. Different parts of Colombia, Bogota, Barranquilla, and I live in Jamaica. So my understanding in Colombia is that persons are used to taste and color. So Mandy was telling us that at certain times of the year, the water has a bit of color to it. I questioned whether it was yellowish. She said more or less, but she thinks it's due to the age of the system. She also said it's surface water, in the sense of the reservoirs that it makes. So there's that. Yeah, I'm surprised that she said she still drinks it. She trusts him and she said it's good. Whatever time of the year she will drink it. Whereas Magdalena here is a soldier. I mean, she told us that at certain times of the year it gets salty. They're closer to the sea and it gets dry. There's some salt water intrusion. But she said she drinks it, other people drink it, and she basically prepared herself for a time when she'll have to drink salty water every day. So we started the soldier here. Belize, which is a bit surprising, she said they are blessed with water resources, waterfalls, rivers, etc. However, in her village, they use groundwater, but they don't drink it because there's high calcium content. So they rather buy water and other further treated water elsewhere. And she also said they're preserving kidney stones from the high calcium content. So that's interesting that there's a lot of water that the treatment and the end result is not what people want, the anthropology. And similarly, Jamaica is blessed with a lot of surface water, groundwater. I was telling them that it really depends on where but similarly, it depends on where you are in the island. So I grew up in a more rural community, and we do rainwater harvesting. So whatever rain we get, whatever water we catch, we use that. Did not drink it straight from the pipe, it was boiled first. But when I tasted it as a child, it tasted fine until I found out that, don't drink it just straight like that, boil it and then use it. When I moved to the city, Kingston, for university, I realized that the water was highly chlorinated. So you turn it on, you could smell the chlorine, everything smelled clean, but then I realized that I had to be using a bit more coffee, a bit more creamer, everything would burn. But persons who are originally from Kingston are used to that and they don't mind it, but I would rather buy bottled water.
So this is interesting. We get the very, even in the same country, different experiences depending on where you are geographically, which highlights the necessity as folks moving into or already working in water planning and management of really thinking about the place and how your people are going to respond. And then I loved what you said about this movement as people move to new areas. What does it mean to encounter water again for a first time or a second time or the 50th time where it's still different from what you're used to? If y'all are experiencing that, you just moved to Delft and it's different, I assume, in some ways from home. But you highlighted another thing, which is the possibility of a knowledge community sharing tricks for addressing water issues. Maybe it's too much chlorine. So when I worked in Paris, one of the things they would say to folks, because the folks would say, I don't like the chlorine in my water, even though way less than in the States, they'd say, well, let your water breathe. Let it sit for 30 minutes. A lot of the chlorine will evaporate and then it's going to taste less. And so they were trying to create this community of practice where people would become what I thought of as co-producers alongside with the water producers in making better water. So that brings us to our next point, which is how can we build essentially a good enough system for your site? And I want to frame this a little bit before we move on to this next bit, which is I don't think the ideal of a system where everyone has access to water that is both microbial, safe from a microbial perspective, safe from a chemical perspective, and desirable from an aesthetic perspective. I don't think we should throw that away. I like having that. But especially I like having it in large part because it fulfills an aim that I think we all share, which is that, as the UN says, everyone should have access to good water, safe water. But I do think we want to be pragmatic about what is feasible in a short term. I have a colleague at ASU, Amit and I were just talking about her, Amber Wutzit. She's like this rock star in the water world. She got a MacArthur Genius Grant last year, I think, for her work. And she's been looking at communities in the US that don't have piped water, that are they've cobbled together whatever they can do to make it work. And she says, okay, yes, this isn't the ideal, but how can we work ethically within this non-ideal, good enough, pragmatic system? And so drawing on her, I want to pose for our next provocation, essentially, what is good enough for your site? And so I want you to think through this in two ways. How do you make certain that people have access to water that tastes good enough for them to accept it? And does that water need to come through a tap? And you can say yes or no. If it's not coming through a tap, what is a system that still is as ethical, as equitable as possible for you to build? And so here it might be that you're looking at a small community system where a group of people, and I'm stealing your example, are going to gather together around a well and build a pump where they can pump to get, like, they're going to create a small community system. That's really going to depend on the region you're in. Is it going to look like the creation of a new water distribution system where you have a series of water cellars, if you will? Is it what is it potentially going to look like to build a good enough system? So we're not looking for the ideal. I'm not looking for that thing that worked really well in the US for a while and is now starting to fall apart. We're looking at what is unique to your location and your situation and what could be good enough. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes to think through this quietly, take notes, and then we'll move to talking with each other about it. So go. And now at this point, start sharing with each other what you think a good enough system might be for the situation that you're imagining working in. So I'm going to give you 5 minutes for that, and then we're going to share out again. So I just had the awesome chance to talk with your two colleagues up there who already have good enough systems, right? Well, will you tell us, please, about the good enough system in your area? All the way up at the top. Left. Okay, different one, but that's good. We'll start here, then we'll bounce over there.
Thank you. I'm Charles from Ivory Coast. For us, from our perspective, what is good enough is water that is conform to the World Health Organization standard. Those include parameters like odor or taste can raise some issues and complexities. For example, utilities company, water utility company is responsible to convey water up to our house or buildings. But to have that water out of our tap, there are inner plumbing systems that do not depend on the water. That is not under the responsibility of the utility company. Mm-hmm. So if you raise the issue of who is responsible, if we have taste or odor, smells coming out of the water. So that may be a big issue, how to answer that complexities. I will let my colleague ask something.
Yeah, like I'm Ali, baby Ali from the Zambia, and we have colleagues from Mali and Kenya too, and Ivory Coast. So what we consider to be good enough sometimes, like some communities they really use groundwater. And that groundwater, that is a well water, they will consider it to be good. Yes, you might bring them, let's say, a bottle, and they will still consider the well water that they use to be good enough. They sometimes look at the taste that they have is better than what you're giving them. So good enough is both community perspective and what we believe to follow locally to require standards that are in place. Yeah, so sometimes it's complex to determine what is good enough at the urban area and what is good enough at rural or provincial area.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So we have similar regulatory system in the US where the utility is responsible up to the property line or the home line. And so you're raising an interesting question about at what level of community or system design do we have to apply good enough to? And what is the form of collaboration between inhabitants and utilities if you're in an urban situation? And also this question of location and the tastes that emerge in a location. So if you were to come in to a rural location where people like the groundwater and the taste, even if it's not safe, and say to them, oh, well, we have to put chlorine in to make it safe or something else, and it changes the taste significantly, they may still just opt out because they don't like it. So how do we build a system that takes into account that social reaction that might happen?
All right, good morning. My name is Wadara Umi from Mali. So, as he has mentioned, the standard is based on the area, the capital and the area size. For example, for my case, like I can actually confirm that those well water are not clean enough because I have been in Algeria. I'm just giving an example. I have been in Algeria for 3 years. So when I went back home for the holiday, I was actually in the capital, so I started drinking those water like Diago and then the types of that it was okay. But I had to travel to even area just to greet some family members that are actually staying there. So once I reached there, so I started drinking the well water, but I fought it for almost 1 week, so I was not okay at all. So I had to move and go back to the capital because I was really sick. I think it was actually based on the water, so it was actually water quality. So the same thing also happens to me when I went to Kenya. So I spent actually 2 days, so I was not okay at all. I think when I went there, so I drink water, I drink that water. I think my stomach was not used to that. The same thing also happens to me here in Netherlands. So when I came here, I spent 2 days not eating because the water was, and then I find also the taste of the water here a bit different from my country. So I find it a bit strange to me, honestly. So I don't know if that's also
I hear rumor you're in good company with coming here and finding the water strange. So
yes, the taste.
Yeah. This is interesting though. It's not just taste, it's this embodied reaction. Your entire body is saying this water is different. It's reacting in a certain way. And so apparently there's also the challenge for us to think about, which is how do we, as new people move into an area, how do we, I'm going to use a term we often use in business, but how do we onboard them? How do we bring them into our community and help them understand what the water quality is? How do we help them understand how to care for the water? So we've got about 3 more minutes before I wrap. Would someone else like to share their insights? Colleagues, please pass right behind you. And then we'll go over to you guys.
Okay, my name is Neville from Kenya. With me, Ishna from Iraq, and Maria from Colombia. My perspective is you cannot talk about quality without looking about quantity itself. In areas where in the country, for example, areas where we experience water scarcity, good enough tends to lower the quality levels. Here, just look at water stability levels and maybe does it have any bacteriological content good enough for the community. Yes, ideally we would like to meet WHO standards, but due to lack of resources, the community finds that acceptable. However, in areas where there is plenty of water supply, we have surface water, people do rainwater harvesting, treatment systems are more available, the level of quality good enough tends to become more stringent, where people now require treated water, some even do reverse osmosis. So it's a tale of how much water do you have, and your perception of good enough changes based on either scarcity or plenty. Yeah.
You're making me wish I had brought, one of the archival photos I found was of soldiers, and the comment said, even when you only get one canteen of overly chlorinated water a day, it's exactly what you want. So you are illustrating that point very well, that as scarcity happens, the acceptability level will shift. A colleague from Jamaica has a comment then.
So I was actually telling Manuela here that you had mentioned it good enough also includes piping, water in your home. And I was telling her that if I did not live in the city and if I did not have to live a much more fast-paced life, I probably would be able to water clean within, close to cities where I am catching it, as long as I knew that I could have access. Because I also saw that in my rural community in Manchester, my family, they had built the tank that catches rainwater, but there were others who they did not have that within their homes, even though our area gets a lot of rain. What would happen is sometimes they would steal the water, so you would hear people coming in at night and turn on the fire. But then in the morning, sometimes you would see them going to one of the nearby catchment tanks, which is some of the rural systems that the government is using in areas that have rainwater, but no piped water system necessarily exists. So depending on the lifestyle, I would be fine with going somewhere and having water and then having to be coming to my life.
Thank you for sharing. Ooh, we have 2 more comments. You're going to be real fast though, right?
Very quickly, I'm from South Africa, but these guys are from the States, and we kind of had a consensus that one requirement is that it is technically safe, so it's free from fluoride or calcium, and that's a big one because those cause serious issues. But it came up between the 2 of us that we want good infrastructure, so she's concerned about lead piping, and then I was concerned about iron buildup or calcium buildup that then affects my washing my clothes or it causes those pipes. So the biggest part for me was controlling the infrastructure, and then the government or management has to be good. Like we had day 0 in Cape Town because the water wasn't managed, and people didn't realize how serious it was when you find that there's a final day where there's not going to be no more water in a city, a big city, and then there's still the wealthy washing their cars. Then it is a bit of a massive miscommunication, and you would hope that the management would become better and everything will be taken a bit more seriously.
My father was the mayor of our town when they had a day 0, and communication did not work. People knew, they still washed their cars and watered their unnecessary lawns. Okay, one final comment over here. I'd love to hear all your comments, but I also want to let you all have your break.
Hello, I'm Benjamin from Peru. So I was listening to my classmate, and it makes come to my mind that in my country we have to boil the water, so we don't pay too much attention to the savor. So also when I go to another country, so I don't care too much about the savor because it's the save of time that I think that I don't have to boil the water. So it's a big thing. So it's easier for me, so I don't pay too much attention to the savor. But yes, for the smell or the color, but it makes a lot of sense about thinking that you don't have a lot of water, the quality that you consume before it doesn't have much.
Okay. You really want to? Okay.
I'm Santiago from Colombia. I think my main concern is that we have this skepticism that we say that, oh, the source is really fine, but when you grow up, your mother, your father will tell you don't drink from the stuff. Even if you know that the quality is good, maybe what I expect is more engagement with the community, like the utility telling you this is the quality of the water that you're taking, and these are the the metrics. And also about the infrastructure, that they tell you that the pipes in the area are of good quality, and very you are, I don't know, maybe an apartment that the owner of the building tells you, we have inspected this and that it's your, I think that's important for me.
So, just to wrap, what I've heard throughout in your conversations are consistently questions of trust are emerging, and the idea of where we are really is going to shape what a good enough system is. So my invitation to you as you do your educational journey here at IHE and then continue your career working in the water world is to remember that even if the larger infrastructures are saying just produce safe water from a microbial or chemical perspective, if you only do that and you do not pay attention to your consumers' perceptions, you will consistently not reach your larger goal, which is providing clean, safe water for everyone with regards to drinking, because they will, at least a section of them, are going to opt out of your system if they cannot trust it from an aesthetic perspective. And as our colleague pointed out, that aesthetic perspective will shift when the quantity of water shifts, or where you are. But keep that in mind. If you can approach your system design from essentially thinking through your consumers' mouths and noses, through their knowledge networks, you're going to have more success, no matter what your limitations are, in building a system that can work for your folks. And I recognize there are a lot of limitations and that infrastructures are imperfect, but I'm really excited for your time here. And I have to tell you what an amazing privilege it is to get to hear your different perspectives. You have such a cohort. It's just so cool. So enjoy that, and thank you again.